The last 5 years haven't been kind to Bluepoint Games, considering that most of its work has been done away by Sony's failed live service push. But it looks like that the talented team is back on its feet and ready for a new chapter. A recent job listing from Bluepoint Games looking for a senior combat designer and senior level designer has many excited gamers speculating that the studio is back to what it does best, remaking popular titles that remain true to the original game, while adding layers of modernity that let it shine with new generations of players. But shouldn't it have been doing that in the first place? Well, that's a question better answered by Sony, whose acquisition of the studio as part of its roster of first-party PlayStation studios back in 2021 seemed a solid choice at the time, but might not have been that way in hindsight. So why is that so? What has Bluepoint Games been up to since that brilliant remake of Demon's Souls? What could be the reason for the studio's silence since then? What does the future hold for that studio? Well, let's dive in and find out. Remaking history for the future. While most modern gamers might know of Bluepoint Games after they brought Demon's Souls to life as a release title that showcased the PS5's current-gen capabilities, the studio has been around for far longer than that. And it has several other remakes and ports to its name that are as iconic as FromSoft's legendary title. Founded in 2006, this Texas-based studio had two of the best names, from Retro Studios at its helm, whose work on Metroid Prime made them quite popular among gamers at the time. Andy O'Neil and Marco Thrush would soon release Bluepoint's first game, Blast Factor, a shooter that was published by Sony for the PlayStation 3. It was the beginning of a professional relationship that would bear a lot of fruit for both companies, and will probably continue to do so in the future. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 3 years later, another collaboration between Bluepoint and Sony saw remastered versions of classic PS2 games make their way to the PS3. PS3 remasters of Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, both action-adventure titles for the PS2, would soon follow. Bluepoint would go on to remake Shadow of the Colossus for the PS4, a title that cemented the studio's reputation as an expert in modernizing iconic classics in the gaming world. That reputation, along with its relationship with Sony, would allow it to have a hand at several brilliant remasters, such as HD versions of Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance, Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, PS4 versions of the Uncharted franchise as part of the Nathan Drake collection, and even a collab with Microsoft for the Xbox 360 version of Titanfall. And then came Demon's Souls. But Bluepoint's relationship with Sony took an interesting turn a year later, when the Japanese giant acquired it and made it a part of PlayStation Studios. Things were a tad quiet on the Bluepoint front after that, until a rather disappointing announcement from Sony in January 2025. A loss of valuable time and effort. Sony's revelation that it was scrapping two live service titles that were hitherto unannounced, both under development by first-party studios that had delivered hits in the past, was a letdown to say the least. Aside from Bluepoint, it was Bend Studios, the developers of Days Gone, that saw one of its projects axed. The studio has had a similar relationship with Sony as Bluepoint has had, having been a part of PlayStation Studios since 2001. Several reports suggest that Bluepoint was working on a live service title as a part of Sony's attempt to make a push into that highly competitive space after its contributions to Ragnarok in 2022. But after Concord's disastrous release, it would seem that Sony seems to be pulling the plug on its live service push. Now, in all fairness, that's a solid move, considering how its studios have been producing excellent titles that continue to make a case for console exclusivity on the PlayStation 5. However, it does seem like a waste of time and effort from the talented folks over at Bluepoint Games, which could have otherwise been spent on either a new IP or another brilliant remaster. Sony has certainly dropped the ball when it comes to Bluepoint, but the latest news from the studio points to the two companies potentially turning things around and continuing to sustain a mutually fruitful relationship. And that brings us to the current buzz surrounding the studio. What could Bluepoint be cooking up that requires a senior combat designer and senior level designer? Opportunities galore. It's quite heartening that Sony was quick to state that neither Bend Studios nor Bluepoint would see any significant business impact from the cancellation of their respective live service titles. The new job listing is an indicator that the studio is already hard at work on a new project, but what could it be? Now, we've already covered the possibility that Bluepoint's new project could be an original IP, requiring its new hires to take on the challenge of crafting exciting combat systems in intriguing puzzles that work together to create an immersive experience. It would be great to see a first-party PlayStation studio with a solid track record finally bring an original release to a very vibrant library of current-gen titles. However, Bluepoint might also be sticking to its strengths, chipping away at a remake of an older IP, but there is one PlayStation exclusive that many gamers and From Software fans have been clamoring for on the PlayStation 5. Bloodborne is among From Software's finest titles, bringing an action-oriented horror experience like no other to the table. Its incredibly designed levels, Lovecraftian motifs, terrifying enemies, and of course its unforgiving combat makes it a perfect candidate for Bluepoint's unique set of skills. Having already worked on a From Software title, the studio is perfectly poised to bring another of Miyazaki's iconic classics to life, in ways that can usher the hunter's mind-blowing adventure into the future, allowing a new generation of gamers to enjoy the experience, while veterans can dive back into it with glee. Moreover, the fact that Bloodborne hasn't been able to make the most of the PS5's graphical prowess makes a compelling case for the game to receive a remaster. We've often dreamt of what taking on bosses with buttery smooth frame rates and detailed visuals would look like and feel like after all. And from the looks of it, we're not alone. A cursory glance at a few related subreddits shows us that Bloodborne fans are alight with hope that the remaster they have long awaited for might finally see the light of day. However, there is a caveat. There is speculation that the remaster/remake could be a launch title for the PS6. Now, that does make sense considering how much of a success Demon's Souls was on the PS5, being a perfect showcase of all the current-gen goodness it brought to the table. It's a good idea to do the same thing for Bloodborne, allowing Bluepoint to dive into the game and recreate it in a way that could be what one astute Redditor calls a console seller, while continuing to retain what has made the experience so special to legions of die-hard fans, who continue to keep the hunt alive in Yharnam even 10 years after the game's original release. Another suggestion that seems unlikely, but could be a delight to Bloodborne fans, is the simultaneous development of the remake as well as a sequel. It would certainly be a delight to see Hidetaka Miyazaki return to a game that he has since left behind. He could very well bring devious new twists to the formula that none of his other titles have featured in the 10 years since Bloodborne's release. Could the Good Hunters be the cornerstone of a bright future for Bluepoint, and be the ones who sustain a solid relationship between Sony and the studio? Well, we certainly hope so. Into the future with hope. Whatever Bluepoint's new project brings to the table, we are optimistic that the studio and Sony will be able to leave the mistakes of the past 5 years behind it. Their collaboration has brought some great work to the gaming world, and Sony's misguided live service push should not be an obstacle of them working together in the future. This new project is sure to resolve a professional relationship that could very well bring us a lot more delightful moments, as we make our way into a very bright future for the world of gaming. Our fingers are crossed with the hope that we might yet wield the Chikage against hordes of vicious enemies yet again. And that brings us to the end of this video. A quick request before we conclude. We upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.